I've read studies saying that low insulin is 4 times more deadly than high insulin. Is that true?
That's remarkable. I could not believe that to be true, and would only believe it in the context of type 1 diabetes.
That might be why.
If the population is a type 1 diabetic population, then I would believe that, because it would suggest the person is underdosing to the point of lethality. But in a non-type 1 diabetic, I would absolutely not believe those outcomes. But that's an important point, Dave, because a lot of the confusion that people have with regards to even the insulinogenic effect of macronutrients, like they will say fat causes an insulin release. And yet every single study that has ever shown that was based on a type 1 diabetic population, where because of their chronic hyperglucagon levels, there is this sort of unexpected quirk of eating fat in a person with type 1 diabetes. But in a non-diabetic population, there's 0 studies to show that fat has an effect on insulin. None. And so even in my own lab, data we just have generated, we're about to publish, I can state it authoritatively, dietary fat has no effect on insulin, and there's never been a study that has ever shown it.
Thank you for saying that. When I write about fasting and intermittent fasting, I've consistently said if you have some butter and MCT oil in coffee or something like that, it has no effect on insulin or mTOR. And a third party actually went out and tested 300 different breakfast options to see their effect on blood sugar and on insulin. And coffee with butter and MCT was at the very top of the list as having no effect whatsoever. That's why you can do it during a fast. True or false?
Yep. Oh, Dave, yes, you and I are completely aligned. In fact, to the point that I've actually wanted to try, and with your audience, you're going to make it happen. I actually think there should be some nuance within the conversation of fasting that I have more and more. I consider there to be 2 types of fasts. One, which is a kind of true classic fast where you're not eating or drinking any calories. That I call a caloric fast. And then what you and I are just describing is what I call a metabolic fast.
There you go.
Which is what determines whether the body's in like at the level of the cell, all of the biochemistry, like the most famous effect being autophagy. Who determines whether autophagy is turned on or off? Well, it's actually insulin for the most part. And this is why famous fasting/starvation physiologists like Dr. George Cahill, who is a legend to me, he described insulin as the hormone of the fed state. And in his estimation, which we ought to take seriously, he said that it's insulin that really determines whether the body's in a fed state, high insulin, or a fasted state, low insulin. Well, what if you're eating in such a quirky way that you are putting calories in, but you're keeping insulin low? So ketogenesis is uninterrupted, mTOR is not turned on, and there's no ceasing or inhibition of autophagy. As far as the cells are concerned, you're still fasting. That's a pretty metabolically relevant scenario where I believe more and more, as much as there are people who say we need to be doing protein fasts where you're just eating protein, during the fast, I actually think there's more value in doing fat fasts, to be honest. Now, there's no studies that have compared those two, so I don't mind if people disagree with me. But for all the reasons you and I have just outlined, I actually think a fat fast is superior in its outcomes than any other form of fasting.
The 2 types of fasting you're talking about, like a caloric fast or a metabolic fast, I characterize them as there's a spiritual fast where you're okay to be maybe at a lower level performance and you're going to push yourself and be introspective. And then there's a working fast where it's the middle of the week. I have a job and kids and stuff to do. So a little bit of fat makes the fast completely painless and you get the metabolic benefits, because I couldn't do what I do if I was never, if I was always just fasting on water. I think it'd be miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, because you just invoked spirituality, I will just add a hearty amen. Okay. I completely agree with everything you just said.